Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be my end of the month wrap up for April, and I have 9 books to talk to you about today. So overall in April I did read 26 books, which is slightly lower than the previous months, but you know, I was pretty busy and 26 is still a pretty good number. In my mid-month wrap up I talked about 17 books, so if you want to hear my thoughts about, let's see, Tuesday Mooney talks to ghosts, In the Shadow of Vesuvius, The Woman in the Mirror, The Twisted Ones, Tyrannosaur Canyon, The Last Days of Jack Sparks, Smoke Bitten, The Sight, Thor Volume 1, The Goddess of Thunder, The Hunt, My Lady Jane, The Sinister Mystery of the Mesmerizing Girl, The Hunting Party, We Ride the Storm, Cryer's War, The Last Imperox or Impero, and The Calculating Stars. Those are all in my mid-month wrap-up, and I'll leave that linked in the description below. So today, like I said, I have 9 other books to talk to you about, and I feel like a lot of these were kind of in the middle of the road, I would say. So something I've been kind of thinking about lately is just mixing up how I do these wrap-ups, because, you know, obviously 9 books is kind of manageable to talk about today, but when I'm talking about 17 or, you know, more than that, it kind of makes the actual filming and editing process a little intimidating, I guess, because I know it's going to be a long wrap up and it just kind of gets exhausting after a bit. So I've been kind of contemplating some different ideas for wrap ups, and a lot of people, I had asked about this on Twitter, and a lot of people gave me some really great ideas, so you know, thank you all again. But I think what I might do, I might just try different things and see what I like the best, but I'm kind of leaning towards doing wrap-ups every 10 books, and so this, you know, wouldn't necessarily stick to a monthly wrap-up, but we'll see. But anyway, let's get into the books that we'll talk about today, and of course we'll work our way up from the lowest rated to the highest rated. So we're going to start off with the lowest rated book, which is a 2.5 star read for me, and so that's the Guinevere Deception by Kiersten White. The premise of the book here is basically that Guinevere is actually a changeling, and magic has been kind of outlawed in Camelot. So she's sent by Merlin to marry Arthur, but dark forces are stirring. So generally speaking, it was kind of mediocre for me. You know, certainly a quick read, but it just wasn't particularly exciting. I really like the whole King Arthur, you know, aspect to it, but I feel like this could have been so much more. And, you know, for me, it was just kind of yeah, this was okay. So, you know, I do think it was an interesting take on Guinevere. I liked how she was a changeling and had, you know, some magical abilities, but overall, it was just kind of forgettable for me. And and then that being said, I did find the ending to be really interesting, but I'm not really sure it was strong enough for me to necessarily want to continue. So now we move into the 3-star range, and I think the first book I'll talk about here is Sweet Black Waves by Kristina Perez. So this is kind of a retelling of Tristan and Isolde. So we follow Branwen, who is the cousin to Princess Isolde and also her lady-in-waiting. Her parents died from a raider attack, and then years later she ends up saving Tristan's life. And he's from these enemy raider people. They kind of start to develop feelings for each other, but then they also have to deal with politics, betrayals, and magic. So this was interesting. I feel like I really liked some parts of it, but then I absolutely hated other parts, and so that kind of, you know, ended up with this 3-star rating. I think had we not had this one particular character, I would have really loved this. So I really liked the main character, Branwen. I think she's very strong and intelligent, and she ends up being pretty skilled in magic, so that's certainly appealing. And she's ultimately trying to do what's best for her country, which I find kind of admirable. Then we have Tristan, who is he's all right. Yeah. I don't really have much more to say about him. He's fine. And then the big downfall for me was Princess Isolde. So, oh my god, was she annoying. I thought she was basically this whiny, entitled piece of shit. I absolutely hated her. She makes these really awful, poor and impulsive decisions throughout the entire book. I'm not entirely sure why Branwen kind of goes along with her and humors her and is so devoted to her, because honestly what I see is that we just have this really entitled princess, and I I don't know, she needs to grow up, basically. And, you know, Branwen's just like kind of makes excuses for her, and it just drove me crazy. But like, aside from her, I did really like the setting. I liked this magic, and again, I like Branwen. There's certainly like a lot of angst, and you know, like part of that comes from the fact that this is a retelling of Kristina Isolde, I think. I'm undecided about continuing. Like, the ending is kind of crazy, but like the thought of reading more with this princess just kind of makes me like cringe. I don't know if I can handle it. The other 3-star book I'll talk about today is The Scribe of Siena by Melodie Winawer. So this is basically Outlander in Italy. So our main character, Beatrice, is a neurosurgeon in New York, and her brother, who had been living in Italy, dies, and she ends up like inheriting his house and all of his research in Siena. So she ends up like basically finding herself in this painting of a 14th century artist, and then is able to travel back in time and actually meet this artist. And there's also this, like, it takes place in 1347. So we've got a bit of an outbreak of the Black Plague. So there's like this whole conspiracy kind of that concerns itself with the Black Plague. Generally, I think there were some good parts, and I liked this whole time travel aspect in general. Like, I do like Outlander quite a bit, so, you know, a lot of those plot elements work for me, but this one I don't think was maybe not quite as good. I think it definitely had some pacing issues. It was very slow in several places. I also thought that Beatrice was pretty quick to adapt to 1347. She, like, kind of gets a job as a scribe pretty quickly, and, you know, isn't, like, I don't know, no one is like, she's doing some things that seem a little suspicious, like maybe she's a witch. Like, none of that really happened, which I thought was a little odd. Aside from that, I did like how Beatrice is a competent doctor, and she like kind of tries to help out with some of the medical things, and like obviously she is aware that the Black Plague exists and is like trying to help people out, and like, hey, you know, you've got a rodent problem, you should probably take care of that. Compared to Outlander, I didn't feel nearly as strong, I guess, about the couple here as I did with, you know, Claire and Jamie from Outlander. Like, they were okay. Like, I liked Beatrice, and the artist dude is alright, but like, yeah, I don't know. I just, like, I don't know if I necessarily bought the romance, basically. I do find this, like, Black Plague element to be very interesting. Perhaps this is not the best fit for reading right now. I don't know. You know, like, I didn't end up having any problems with it. But I do think that this, like, whole conspiracy that deals with the Black Plague was really interesting. But, yeah, it's not something I would necessarily reread. And I do think, like, Outlander tells this sort of similar story better. So now we get into the 3.5-star range. The first book I'll talk about here is After Atlas by Emma Newman. So this is, like, the second book in this Planetfall series, and I think they're all kind of standalones, except for maybe the fourth book, which possibly follows directly from this book. I don't exactly remember. So yeah, they're technically standalones, but I do think you should read them in the order of publication. This is a sci-fi series, and in this particular one, we follow Carlos, who is the son of one of the people who went on this like Atlas spaceship to do some space travel. So that was kind of like what the first book was about. So his mom went on this spaceship, and basically her abandonment kind of led his dad to lose hope and get involved in with this leader of a religious cult. Carlos is called in years later to investigate this cult leader's death, and uncover secrets along the way. I definitely like this better than Planetfall. This particular storyline appealed to me a little bit more, I think. But I will say the structure of it isn't entirely what I thought. Like, the murder mystery kind of wraps up earlier than I anticipated. I do think it's a really interesting world, and like basically these people kind of have like these chips almost to connect to the internet and the world. So there's like a lot of pretty cool advanced technology going on here. Our main character insists on eating real food, which I thought was an interesting touch. Like, you know, I thought that was pretty relatable. So basically, like, what's happening here is people end up eating like 3D printed food, essentially. He insists on like cooking everything and getting like fresh ingredients. So, I feel like if I were in this situation, I might go for real ingredients as well, though, I'm not always necessarily in the mood to cook. But anyway, but like I think he does this as kind of like a way to control his body and his life, because certain aspects of his life are a little bit out of his control. There's definitely some really dark moments for sure. I think there's some talk about like sex slavery and just like slavery in general, I would say, as well as abuse. I do think it's a really interesting exploration of like kind of, you know, if we were to have this technology, how would people be addicted to it, and, you know, things like that. But yeah, so sometimes I think what made it like a 3.5 star read for me was like, I think the pacing was a little bit off, and, you know, there were moments in the book where I'd just be like, okay, I'm like a little bit bored, but ultimately I did enjoy it and would recommend it. I did find this to be better than Planetfall, and I'm mostly like really excited for the third book in the series, which is Before Mars, and that has more of a murder mystery. Maybe it's a closed circle murder mystery. I don't entirely remember, but that was like the one that kind of drew me into this series in the first place. So I'm excited to continue that and see what happens in the rest of the series. The next book I'll talk about in this 3.5 star range is Moon Deeds by Palmer Pickering. So I did receive this for review from the author. And this is, again, like, I kind of mentioned this in my book haul video, but it's a blend of sci-fi and fantasy, and it's set in, like, the future, and I think 2090 in the real world. This takes place mostly on the Earth, but also the moon. So we have, like, an invading alien race, and, like, kind of, like, a mixed race of humans and aliens, and they're, like, basically trying to take over the Earth. Part of the West Coast in the US essentially has this, like, magical barrier that's actually more powerful than the alien tech, so I thought that was really interesting, you know, like, having magic be able to defeat technology. I thought that was cool. So we follow this set of twins, Cassidy and Tor, as they like kind of try to escape from Earth and discover their power and destiny as this like foretold star children, and they're basically like supposed to, or these prophecies, star children are born every millennium to reconnect with the source of all life. So I think there were a lot of really interesting ideas here. I liked the setting. It kind of has like this urban fantasy feel, but also, you know, space travel, so that was really cool. And I also liked how we had a blend of magic and technology, so a nice sci-fi fantasy blend. I definitely, like, felt the urgency, I think, of the war on Earth and some of the, you know, I would say, like, dire straits on the moon that they end up experiencing. It's not great. So Tor, one of the twins, is kind of this, like, tormented ex-soldier, and he's kind of, like, haunted by some of the things that he had to do while like being this soldier. And then Cassidy, our other twin, I actually liked her a lot. She has some magical abilities, and a lot of her powers deal with healing, and she basically like knows properties of plants. So she can like, she has kind of this like magic book where it will like tell her what like, I don't know, plants and things to use to heal someone's problems, whether they're like, you know, mental or physical issues that somebody's experiencing. So I really liked that. I thought that was very well done. There were a whole bunch of different aliens and planets mentioned, though, you know, I will say I don't have necessarily the best sense of all of these places and people, but I think it's interesting to kind of have this variety of alien species and, you know, plants and everything like that. On the moon, I think there were some really interesting side characters introduced. Like, there was this one family that they, like, I don't know, really try to work together. There's this other character, Ridge, who is introduced, and, like, basically he seems to kind of, like, be a good person at heart and, like, want to help people, but he's, like, kind of constrained with his help based on political things happening, and, you know, like, I'm trying to be kind of vague about that, but he seems like an interesting character. So what I will say, like, what didn't quite work for me, I did feel like the pacing was off at times, and, you know, like, this is a fairly chunky book, so I'm not entirely surprised that happened. Like, on Earth in particular, it did seem like they had to wait a really long time for Tor to arrive. So, you know, it's like things like that where the pacing was just not necessarily as quick as I wanted it to be. Another thing that is worth mentioning, like, on the moon, there's quite a bit of action, I think, kind of at the end, but then it kind of leaves off on a bit of a cliffhanger, I would say. Overall, I did really like how it blended, again, fantasy and sci-fi. I feel like this could appeal to a variety of people. The next book I'll talk about is Aquaman Volume 2, The Others, and this is by Geoff Johns. So this is the New 52 line, I guess, of Aquaman. So I had read Volume 1 in November, I think. So a lot of the plot points, I think, throughout this particular series is kind of like what they drew on for the Aquaman movie. So this one deals a lot with Black Manta. So basically, Black Manta is attempting to collect various artifacts of Atlantis. Then Aquaman kind of meets up with the others who are they're this group of superheroes who Arthur used to work with, and they actually have these artifacts. So basically, it's a lot of Black Manta versus Aquaman, and they both want to kill each other for reasons provided in this volume. So this was pretty enjoyable overall. I really had no idea who any of these others were, so that was kind of cool to be introduced to them. And I don't necessarily know if I have the best sense of all of their abilities, but as a first introduction, I think that was fine. I found Arthur, or Aquaman himself, to be a little annoying at times. I feel like he's trying to look out for people, but at the same time he's refusing any help because he doesn't want people to be hurt along the way, and he's super focused on revenge. So I don't know, that's kind of a mixed bag. On one hand, I feel like that's understandable, but on the other, I don't know, these plot points of kind of withholding information and just not having this conversation of yo, I'm worried for your safety, let's maybe not do that. It annoys me when that doesn't happen and people are just making choices for what they think is best. So I feel like there was a little bit of that in here, but ultimately I did, again, enjoy it overall. Mira comes back in here, and I do continue to like her. I think she is pretty badass. In terms of the artwork, that's really well done. And I think this ends up setting us up for the plot that's a lot more like the Aquaman movie. So I think Volume 3 is actually the fight for the throne of Atlantis against his half-brother. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fun so far, and I'm interested in continuing certainly. The last of the 3.5-star books I'll talk about is Pretty as a Picture by Elizabeth Little. So I had won this as in a Goodreads giveaway. I think the premise here is that we follow Marissa, who is a film editor, and she's hired to work for this notoriously demanding director on a film that's basically about the murder of a girl. So on the set, she realizes that things are slightly off. There's a whole bunch of scandals and crew members being fired, and no one knows what happened to the previous editor who she was hired to replace. So then we have these teen girls who are trying to solve the actual real case of this girl who was murdered, and so our main character kind of joins up. But maybe the killer is still on the loose. So I think this was a pretty enjoyable thriller overall. My major complaint is I didn't really feel that much about the murder mystery. I think, there weren't a whole lot of clues up until the final reveal. So what I typically look for in a thriller is kind of this balance between, being able to immediately guess what's going to happen and not being able to guess at all, which is what happened here. So I like to have little tidbits throughout so I can form an opinion on, who I think the killer was or whatever. And, it's fine if these tidbits make me guess my decision, but, I don't want everything to be predictable, and I also don't want to have I don't want to go in having no clue what's going on. So that's kind of, what detracted here. But ultimately, again, I did enjoy it. Marissa has some troubles, I think, with social interactions. She has, I think, trouble connecting with people. She, doesn't like being touched. She has, certain routines that she needs to do as well. So I feel like that was portrayed pretty well, at least in my opinion. I really liked her interactions with Isaiah, who works as security on this movie project. There's a whole bunch of references to, films and filmmaking, and just movie making culture in general. I think it's also kind of an exploration of these murder stories and just how we're kind of fascinated by them as a culture. And then throughout the book there's kind of some excerpts of the true crime podcast, which were pretty entertaining. So yeah, I thought that this was a pretty enjoyable thriller. My only major complaint was that I wish I had been able to pick up on some clues throughout the book, but such is life. It was still enjoyable, so, and I would still recommend it if this premise sounds interesting to you. So then we move into the 4-star range, and the first book I'll talk about here is Bonds of Brass by Emily Skrutskie. So this is a sci-fi book, and I actually won, I think, a giveaway of this through the publisher and obtained that via NetGalley. Our main character has had his homeworld invaded, and he ends up enrolling in this Imperial Academy, essentially, in order to be a pilot. And he's super talented at being a pilot. So then he finds out that his roommate and best friend and also kind of love interest, is actually the heir to this empire. And he finds this out after an assassination attempt of his friend. So they end up fleeing, and kind of get involved in some politics. So I think this was mostly enjoyable. I certainly did predict some things, but you know, overall that's okay. I found the main character to be pretty relatable. I definitely liked the main character the most out of everybody. I really appreciated how he's like very skilled as a pilot, and he's very willing to like do whatever it takes to save his friends. I did like seeing how this relationship between our main character and his roommate, best friend, love interest dude, how that changes over the book. Like, it kind of ended up in a place where I didn't necessarily expect, so I really appreciated that part. Some of the other side characters are really interesting. Like, we have this girl, Win, who seems pretty cool. She's, like, certainly a troublemaker for sure. She's also kind of like a thief, and she makes some very impulsive decisions, but, like, ultimately she's pretty entertaining. But then we come to the roommate, best friend, heir to the Empire dude. Yeah, I feel like I didn't like him as much. He doesn't seem like really genuine, and like it kind of makes me question, you know, who he is as a person. So I don't know if I necessarily want to root for like our main character getting together with him, so I'll just leave it at that. In terms of the plot, I thought this was really interesting. It's very fast-paced and engaging. It kind of actually did remind me a bit of Star Wars. You know, we have like this empire, obviously, we have a rebellion, how the ships fly in general, and just like the pilots themselves. A lot of that reminded me of aspects from Star Wars, so definitely liked that. I think it was really interesting having our characters needing to balance like family, love, duty, revenge, all throughout the book. It certainly makes for a lot of like complex relationships between everybody. And it like ultimately leads off in a really interesting place. So I would definitely recommend this. I had a really great time with it, and I'm excited to see what happens next. So the last 4-star book, and actually the last book I'll talk about today, is Behind the Red Door by Megan Collins. So this I won in a Goodreads giveaway. This comes out in August, though I don't know if that's been pushed back or not. So this is a thriller, and we follow Fern, who is our main character, and she basically sees that this woman, Astrid, is missing, and she's kind of like, I feel like I know this woman. But her husband is like, well, you know, it could just be because this woman had been kidnapped like 20 years before this, and this was like a really high-profile kidnapping. Fern has had some nightmares that feature this missing woman, so she's like, I don't know about that. She ends up going to help her father move, and like buys Astrid's like autobiography that she has recently published, and starts to remember things. So this was pretty intense. Fern is certainly an unreliable narrator, and she kind of like straight up admits that in the book itself. So I thought that was kind of like, okay, yeah, you know, like I can get behind that. So Fern has had some trauma in her life and deals with some anxiety throughout the book, and she has some like nervous tics. There's definitely some content warnings here for abuse and like pretty awful parent-child relationships. In terms of the actual mystery itself, well, I did predict some things. There were some like enough red herrings, I guess, thrown in there so that I like actually questioned what I thought I knew. So that's like, in terms of a thriller, this is kind of what I'm after. There's some like really messed up stuff in here, so definitely, again, going back to the content warnings, that exists, so be aware. Generally, it's pretty quick to read, and I found it quite engaging. I did like Fern quite a bit, and I felt pretty bad for her, but I ultimately really liked where her character development ended up. If you're not worried about these content warnings, I would definitely suggest picking it up. So those are the 9 books I think that I have to talk to you about today, and that's for like the second-ish half of April. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. For your question of the day, have you read many stories that are like King Arthur retellings? And if so, you know, do you have any that you would recommend? Because like this is something that I'm definitely after right now for whatever reason. I guess I do tend to enjoy King Arthur and like Tristan and Isolde, I guess, stories, but I feel like I haven't read as many retellings of them. I hope you're having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, so that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm gonna wrap it up here and see you in the next one.